walked into his own son's honors ceremony with another woman on his arm. A scarlet dress, statement jewelry, heels clicking across the auditorium floor like she had earned the right to be there. His sister walked beside them, scanning the room with the satisfied expression of a woman who had finally arranged the picture the way she always wanted it. And they moved together, the three of them, like a unit, like a family, like the woman sitting alone in the fourth row holding gardenias for her son had never existed at all. But here is what makes this story different from every other story you have heard about a man who lost his mind and forgot who he was married to. That woman in the fourth row, the one in the ivory gown, the one sitting with perfect posture and a face that revealed absolutely nothing, the one who had been dismissed and overlooked and quietly erased from her own family for the better part of 2 years. That woman was not what anyone in that room thought she was. She was not the quiet, simple, steady wife that her husband had reduced her to. She was not the woman with little projects and no ambition. She was not the woman who needed saving or sympathy or a seat at someone else's table. That woman was sitting on a $32 billion empire, and nobody in that auditorium knew it. Not his sister, not his girlfriend, and certainly not him. The man who had lived under the same roof with her for 19 years and never once bothered to ask the right questions. Now, let me ask you something before I get into this story. Have you ever been underestimated by the very person who should have known you best? Have you ever poured yourself into something for years, building quietly, working relentlessly, only to have the person closest to you wave it off like it was nothing, like it was a hobby, like it was cute? Have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own home, in your own marriage, in your own life? And have you ever wondered what would happen if the people who dismissed you were suddenly forced to see the full picture of who you actually are? Because that is exactly what happened in this story, and I promise you by the time I finish telling it, you are going to remember it for a very long time. Now, before I get into this, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that a woman's silence is never a sign of weakness, go ahead and smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because the story I am about to tell you is going to take turns you do not see coming. And trust me, you do not want to miss a single one. Let us get into it. Her name was Ankeki. She was 44 years old, and she had spent the better part of her adult life mastering a skill that most people never learn, and even fewer understand. The skill of stillness. Not the kind of stillness that comes from having nothing to say, not the kind that comes from being empty or passive or resigned. This was a different kind entirely. This was the stillness of a woman who felt everything, processed everything, understood everything, and simply chose with surgical precision what the world was allowed to see. She did not wear her pain on the outside. She did not broadcast her struggles. She did not perform her emotions for an audience the way so many people do, turning every private wound into a public production. She took her pain and she folded it carefully, and she placed it somewhere deep inside herself where it could not slow her down. And then she kept moving. That was her gift, and it was also her burden, because the people in her life, the people who should have known better, had mistaken that ability for so many things over the years. They called it coldness. They called it simplicity. They called it a lack of depth. They looked at this woman who could absorb a devastating blow without flinching, and they concluded that she must not feel things the way they did, that she must be wired differently, that she must not need what other people need. They were wrong. They were catastrophically wrong, and by the time they realized it, it was far too late to matter. Nkechi had learned this quality from her grandmother, a woman named Ades, who had raised her in a modest house outside of Accra with nothing but a sewing machine, a Bible she quoted selectively when the occasion called for it, and a conviction that ran so deep it was practically structural. The conviction that a woman's truest power is the one she never has to announce. Ades was not a wealthy woman by any conventional measure. She did not come from money. She did not marry into it. She made her living with her hands and her mind, and her relentless refusal to be defined by what she lacked. She sewed garments for women in the community. She managed a small savings circle that grew over the years into something the local banks started paying attention to. She raised her granddaughter with the understanding that the world would not hand her anything, and that this was not a tragedy but a starting position. She died when Nkeki was 22, and she left behind one physical thing that Nkeki would carry with her for the rest of her life, a small leather pouch filled with handwritten notes. Not a diary exactly, more like a collection of observations, thoughts about business, thoughts about people, thoughts about the architecture of patience. And on the very first page, written in Adiye's careful handwriting, was a sentence that Nkeki had read so many times. The ink had started to fade. A woman who knows her worth does not argue with those who cannot count. Nkeki carried that pouch with her every single day, in her handbag, in her briefcase, on the nightstand when she slept. It was not a good luck charm. It was not sentiment. It was a compass. It was the voice of a woman who had understood something fundamental about the world, and Nkeki oriented her entire life around it. Now, let me tell you about the man she married. His name was Kababina. He was 46 years old, and he had never met a mirror he did not trust. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built in the way that certain men are built, where you can tell they spend time thinking about how they look from across a room. He wore tailored suits on weekdays and pressed shirts on weekends. He polished his shoes every Sunday evening, lining them up by the closet door like soldiers awaiting inspection. He kept his hairline sharp. He kept his smile ready. He kept his handshake firm in that particular way that says, "I am important and you should know it," without him ever having to say the words out loud. He was charming. That was the word everyone used. Kababina is so charming. He could hold a dinner table captive with a story about absolutely nothing. He could make a stranger feel like the most important person in the room with one well-placed compliment and a look that said, "I see you." He was the kind of man who thrived at parties, at networking events, at any gathering where the currency was first impressions and the exchange rate was surface-level charisma. But here is the thing about that kind of charm. It is spectacular in the first hour and completely useless by the second. Because marriages do not live in first impressions. Marriages live in the private hours, the ones nobody sees, the 2 in the morning conversations, the wordless gestures that say, "I know you are carrying something, and I am here." The willingness to sit in another person's silence and not try to fill it with yourself. And in those hours, in those quiet, sacred hours, where a marriage is either built or broken, Kababina had been absent for a very long time. They had been married 19 years, long enough for Nkeki to know every version of him. She had seen the early version of him. The one who used to sit on the kitchen floor with her at midnight, sharing cold food and talking about the future, like it was a country they were going to build together, brick by brick, dream by dream. She had loved that version with everything she had. And she had grieved the loss of it in the quiet, invisible way that women grieve things that do not die all at once, but fade so slowly that you do not realize they are gone until one morning you reach for them and your hand closes around air. She never made a production of that grief. She never stood in the middle of the living room and announced that something precious was disappearing. She simply noticed, she adjusted, she kept going because that is what Nkeki did, that is what she had always done. The problem was not that the marriage had one dramatic breaking point. There was no single catastrophic event, no explosive argument, no night where everything shattered in a way that could be pointed to and named. The problem was subtler than that, and in many ways far more destructive. Kababina stopped being curious about his wife. It happened gradually. Somewhere around year 11, he made a decision that he was probably not even conscious of making. He decided that he understood her, that she was predictable, dependable, steady. He used these words the way people use words they think are compliments, but that actually function as cages. Steady meant she did not require attention. Dependable meant she would always be there, regardless of how he treated her. Predictable meant he no longer needed to wonder what she was thinking or building or becoming because he already knew. Except he did not know anything. It did not know anything. He had simply stopped looking. He asked about her consulting work exactly 4 times in 15 years. 4 times. In 15 years, she answered every time in her careful, measured way, offering him a window into what she was building, and every single time he nodded politely, made a sound that was supposed to pass for interest, and redirected the conversation back to himself, back to his development projects, back to the deals he was chasing, back to the version of his life that he found interesting enough to discuss. He never noticed that her answers had grown larger each year. He never noticed because he stopped listening after the first sentence. And that right there, that failure, that quiet, persistent refusal to pay attention to the person sharing his bed and his name and his life, that is the thing that broke everything, not suddenly, not loudly, but completely. Their son was Dubem, 19 years old, a young man assembled from contradictions he was still learning how to hold together. He had his mother's intensity, that deep interior focus that could lock onto a problem and not let go until it surrendered. And he had his father's ambition, that restless forward energy that was always reaching for the next thing. But in Dubem, these qualities did not complement each other. They competed, and the battleground was his own chest. He was brilliant in the particular way that children raised in complicated households become brilliant. Not from privilege, not from ease, from necessity. He had learned by the age of 12 to decode his father's mood from the sound of his footsteps on the staircase. Heavy meant anger, and you should find somewhere else to be. Brisk meant distraction, which was actually the safest option, because it meant his father would pass through the room without really seeing anyone in it. And slow was the hardest, because slow meant tenderness. The rare, unpredictable tenderness that surfaced just often enough to remind you of what this man was capable of being and how rarely he chose to be it. Dubem loved his mother with a love that had no conditions attached, no fine print, no escape clause. It was the love of a son who had watched a woman absorb blow after blow without ever breaking, who had seen her swallow cruelty that would have leveled most people and come out the other side not hardened, not bitter, but refined, sharper, clearer. More herself than she had been before the blow landed. And he understood at some level that went deeper than words that this woman was made of something rare. He feared his father, not physically. Kwabena had never raised a hand, but there are forms of violence that do not leave bruises, and the one Dubem knew best was the violence of being made to feel like an afterthought. Like a task on a list that kept getting deprioritized, like a son who existed in his father's peripheral vision, but never quite made it to the center. And he carried both of those things inside him, the fierce love and the quiet fear, stacked on top of each other, like stones in a wall he was still learning how to build. Now I need to tell you about Yolanda, and I need to tell you the truth about her, not the comfortable version that Kwabena had constructed in his own mind, but the actual truth. Kwabena had built himself a story. He told it to himself often, the way people tell themselves stories they need to believe in order to keep living the way they are living without confronting what they have become. The story went like this. The marriage was already broken, and Ketchy and I had already drifted apart. We were roommates, not partners. What happened with Yolanda was a consequence, not a cause. I did not break anything. I simply found warmth in a house that had already gone cold. It was a beautiful story, well constructed, almost convincing, and it was a lie. The marriage had not gone cold. Nkeki had not withdrawn. What had happened was quieter than that and far more damning. Kwabena had stopped investing. He had stopped depositing into the emotional account of his marriage while continuing to expect withdrawals. He had stopped showing up in the ways that matter, the small, consistent ways that say, I choose you today, the same way I chose you 19 years ago. And then he had looked around at the resulting emptiness and blamed it on his wife. That is what a lot of people do. They starve something and then call it dead. They neglect something and then call it broken. They stop watering the garden and then stand over the dry soil and say, look, nothing grows here. It must be the soil's fault. It was not the soil's fault. Yolanda appeared 20 months before the ceremony. She managed a boutique real estate firm 3 blocks from Kwabena's office. She was 31 years old, polished, energetic, and possessed of a gift that is devastatingly effective on men who have stopped feeling seen in their own homes. The gift of attention. She laughed at his jokes, not politely, brightly, with her whole face. She remembered the details of his deals, the names of his clients, the outcomes of his negotiations. She leaned forward when he spoke, and that leaning forward, that physical movement toward him when he opened his mouth, felt to a man who had been existing in a house of quiet dignity for years like sunlight after the longest winter of his life. He knew it was wrong. Let me be very clear about that. He was not confused. He was not swept away by forces beyond his control. He made a choice. He looked at the life he had built with his wife and his son, and he looked at the easy, uncomplicated warmth of a woman who asked nothing of him except his presence. And he chose the easy thing. He is not the first man to make that choice. He will not be the last. But I need you to understand something that a lot of people miss when they hear stories like this. Understanding that a wound is common does not make it bleed any less for the person left holding it. The fact that this happens every day in households all over the world does not reduce by one single degree the devastation it causes to the person who trusted you with their life. Nkechi knew within 6 weeks. She did not find a text message. She did not catch him in a lie. She did not need to. She had always possessed the ability to read patterns, to notice shifts, to see where something was moving before it arrived. It was the same ability that had made her extraordinary at what she did professionally, and she turned that ability on her own marriage with the same precision she applied to everything else. She noticed the phone angled slightly away during dinner. She noticed the new cologne on a Wednesday when he had no evening plans she was aware of. She noticed the particular way he said the words work meeting, with a fraction too much emphasis on the word work, as if the sentence itself knew it was a lie and was trying too hard to sound convincing. She sat with that knowledge for 11 days. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She held the information at arm's length and examined it from every angle, the way her grandmother had taught her to examine difficult things, not from a place of denial, not from a place of numbness, from a place of clarity. Because Nkechi understood that the worst time to make a decision is in the first wave of emotion, when the pain is so loud it drowns out everything else. She waited for the noise to settle. She waited until she could see the full shape of the thing, and then she decided she would not perform devastation. She would not shatter plates or change the locks or deliver the kind of volcanic confrontation that would give Kwabena exactly what he needed, which was a narrative, a story he could tell himself and his sister and his friends about how his wife went crazy, about how she was irrational, about how her reaction justified his choices. She would not give him that. Instead, she would protect her son. She would maintain her dignity, and she would keep building. Because here is what Nkechi understood that Kwabena did not. The most powerful response to disrespect is not destruction. It is elevation. You do not tear down the person who wronged you. You rise so high above them that they cannot reach you even if they tried. But what she had not anticipated, what even Nkechi with all her patience and all her foresight had not fully prepared for, was how far the betrayal would extend beyond her husband. If this story is already hitting you, drop a comment right now and tell me what you would have done in her shoes. Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have confronted him? Would you have walked out that night? Tell me, I want to know, and make sure you are subscribed because this story is about to take a turn that nobody, including Nkechi, saw coming. Kwabena's eldest sister was a woman named Akosua. She was 51, immaculately put together at all times, and possessed of a particular talent for making other women feel like they were being evaluated. Not judged exactly, evaluated. Like she was running some private internal assessment that she would never share the results of, but that you could feel happening behind her eyes every time she looked at you. From the very beginning, from the first family gathering Nkechi attended 20 years ago as Kwabena's girlfriend, Akosua had maintained a careful distance, not hostility. That would have been too honest, too direct, too easy to name and confront. What Akosua practiced was something more sophisticated, a warmth that never quite reached her eyes, compliments that carried a faint undertone of surprise. "Oh, Nkechi, you look so nice today," said with a slight emphasis on today that implied most days she did not. "Oh, you cooked this yourself," said with the raised eyebrow that suggested the achievement was unexpected and therefore somewhat amusing. So she absorbed it, she filed it away, she kept showing up, she kept being gracious, she kept setting the table and cleaning the kitchen and buying the birthday gifts and doing all the invisible labor that holds a family together, while the people who benefit from that labor treat you like the help. When Akosua found out about Yolanda, something shifted, and Nkechi saw it immediately. Kwebanina had told his sister before he ever attempted an honest conversation with his wife. Let me say that again, because I need you to understand the specific shape of that betrayal. He went to his sister. He confided in his sister. He gave his sister the truth that he owed his wife. He handed the most intimate, most devastating piece of their marriage to a woman who had spent 20 years keeping his wife at arm's length, and he did it as casually as handing someone a newspaper. Akosua's response was not shock. It was not disappointment. It was not even concern. It was something that looked, to Nkechi's trained eye, unmistakably like satisfaction, like relief. Like a verdict she had been waiting to deliver for 2 decades had finally been confirmed, and from that moment the erasure began. Yolanda started appearing at family events, not gradually, not tentatively, suddenly, as if a vote had been taken at a meeting Nkechi was not invited to attend, and the results were unanimous. She was at the August family barbecue. Seated in the chair that Nkechi had occupied for 19 years, the one by the window, the one near the kitchen, the one that everyone knew, was hers without it ever being officially assigned. Yolanda sat in it like she had always been there, and nobody said a word. She was at Thanksgiving, helping in the kitchen alongside Akosua with an ease that had clearly been rehearsed, handing dishes back and forth with the casual intimacy of women who have known each other for years, not weeks. She was at the Christmas gathering, where Akosua introduced her to the extended family. Aunts and uncles and cousins who had known Nkechi for 2 decades watched as this new woman was presented with a warmth, a genuine glowing warmth that had been withheld from Nkechi for the entirety of her marriage. And the small cruelties accumulated. A group text thread about a family vacation that included Kwebanina, Akosua, Yolanda, and several cousins. Nkechi was not on it. She found out about the trip from Dubem, who mentioned it casually at dinner one evening, not realizing his mother had not been informed. A photograph posted on social media from a Sunday brunch. Yolanda seated between Kwebanina and his mother. Everyone smiling, everyone present. Nkechi's absence visible not as a gap but as a correction, as though the frame had been adjusted to show the picture the family had always wanted. A birthday card for Dubem that arrived at the house, signed by Kwebanina, signed by Yolanda, signed by Akosua, not signed by Nkechi, as though she had already been edited out of her own son's life by people who had no right to hold the pen. Each cruelty was small enough on its own, small enough to deny, small enough that if you held any single one up to the light and examined it individually, it would look like nothing, an oversight, a miscommunication, an innocent mistake. But Nkechi understood architecture. She understood that a building is not brought down by a single crack. It is brought down by the accumulation of fractures, dozens of them, hundreds of them, each one insignificant on its own, but together compromising the entire structure from within. She felt every single one. She was not numb. She was not detached. She was not the unfeeling machine that Kwebanina had convinced himself she was. She felt every exclusion, like a blade. She registered every omission like a bruise. She lay awake on nights when Kwebanina was at his own place and ran through the catalogue of small cruelties in her mind and felt the full weight of what was being done to her. But she had made a decision about her energy, and she was keeping it. Now let me tell you about the confrontation, because there was one. Just one. And it changed everything. It was a Thursday evening in March, 7 months before the ceremony. Dubem was at the university library, studying for midterms. The house was empty in the particular way that houses are empty when a marriage has already vacated the premises, even though both people still technically share the same address, and Nkechi was standing at the kitchen island. She had poured herself tea, rooibos, no sugar, The same thing she drank every evening at the same time in the same cup. There is something about routine that steadies a person when everything else is shifting, and Nkechi held onto her routines the way a climber holds onto fixed points on a rock face. Kwabamina was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. Not doing anything specific, just scrolling. The mindless mechanical gesture of a man who had become so accustomed to being in the same room as his wife without actually being present that he had forgotten she was a human being standing 4 feet away and not a piece of furniture arranged against the wall. Nkechi set her cup down. She looked at him. She waited until the quality of her silence was dense enough to break through whatever he was doing on that screen. And when he finally looked up, when he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, she spoke. She said it in the voice she used for everything. Level clear, stripped of performance, stripped of pleading, stripped of everything except the truth. I have known for a long time. I am asking you one time to tell me what you intend to do about this marriage. He set the phone down, not quickly. Slowly, the way a man sets something down when he is buying time to think. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, not shame. The particular discomfort of a man who has been operating under the assumption that his actions were invisible and has just discovered, with jarring clarity, that they were not. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said the words that Nkechi would carry with her for the rest of her life, not because they were the most painful words he had ever spoken, although they were, but because they were the most honest, the most accidentally, devastatingly honest thing he had ever said to her in 19 years of marriage. He said, "Nkechi, honestly, I think you have outgrown needing me. You have got your little projects, you have got Dubum. You do not really need a husband, you need an audience, and I was never good at just watching your little projects." Let me say that again so it lands the way it landed on her. Your little projects, 19 years of marriage, 19 years of raising his son, 19 years of managing his household, 19 years of building something he never once bothered to look at closely enough to understand. And he reduced the entirety of her professional life, her ambition, her discipline, her vision, her relentless work to 2 words. Little projects. Nkechi stood there. She let those words enter her body. She felt them move through her the way a blade moves through still water, cleanly, completely, leaving no visible wound on the surface, but cutting everything underneath. She breathed in, she breathed out, she picked up her tea, she walked to the study, she closed the door behind her, not a slam, a click, the soft, decisive click of a woman who has just heard the last thing she needed to hear. She sat at her desk. She opened the leather pouch. She read her grandmother's handwriting. A woman who knows her worth does not argue with those who cannot count. She closed the pouch. She opened her laptop. She looked at the numbers she had been tracking for 7 years. She studied them. She closed the laptop and she made a decision. She was finished, not broken, not defeated, not collapsed, finished in the way that a sculptor is finished. Not because the stone is exhausted, but because the shape is complete and there is nothing left to remove. And I need you to understand the difference because most people never do. There is a difference between being done and being defeated. Being defeated means you stop moving. It means the weight of what has happened to you has pressed you into the ground and you cannot get back up. Being done is something else entirely. Being done means you stop wasting motion in the wrong direction. It means you gather every ounce of energy you have been spending on a situation that will never change and you redirect it, all of it. Every drop toward where you are actually going. Nkechi redirected. She retained a divorce attorney the following week. She did it quietly through a referral from a colleague Kwabena had never met, in an office he would never think to look for. She restructured her business holdings through a trust that her financial advisors had been recommending for 2 years. She met with her advisory board, and yes, she had a board. She had had one for 6 years. 7 people across 3 continents with collective expertise that would have staggered Korbanina if he had ever known about it. But he did not know about it because he had never asked. She began the process of organizing what needed to be organized. She moved personal files into a separate secure cloud account. She documented what needed to be documented. She positioned every piece on the board with the quiet, meticulous patience of a woman who understood that the endgame was approaching, and she intended to be ready when it arrived. She did all of this without drama, without announcement, without a single change in her daily behavior that Kwabena could have noticed. And the truth is, even if she had changed something, he would not have noticed, because noticing requires attention, and attention requires care, and care requires love, and love, the real kind. The kind that shows up in the boring hours, and the hard conversations, and the willingness to truly see another person. That kind of love had left this marriage a long time ago, at least from his side. Now let me tell you what Kwabena did not know about his wife's little projects. 4 months before the ceremony, Nkeki's firm completed a merger, not a small one, not a modest one, a merger that had been in negotiation for 3 years across multiple jurisdictions, with legal teams on 4 continents, and a complexity that most people could not even conceptualize, let alone execute. When the deal closed, the combined entity's valuation settled at $32 billion. $32 billion. Let that number sit with you for a moment. Let it settle into the same space where his words are still echoing. Your little projects, $32 billion of little projects. She found out the final number at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. She was sitting in her car, not in the driveway of the house because she could not take the call inside. Kwabena was home that night, one of the increasingly rare nights he slept under the same roof, and she could not risk him overhearing a conversation he had never earned the right to be part of. So she sat in the parking lot of a grocery store 3 blocks away. The engine off, the windows cracked, the phone pressed to her ear as her CFO walked her through the final numbers. When the call ended, she sat in that car for 14 minutes. For 9 of those minutes, she cried. Not from sadness, not from relief, exactly from the sheer, crushing, overwhelming weight of recognition. The recognition that 15 years of mornings that started before dawn and nights that ended long after midnight, 15 years of decisions made in solitude and risks taken without applause and sacrifices that nobody witnessed, had built something that most people will not build in 10 lifetimes, and she had done it while being overlooked, while being excluded from family photos and left off group texts, and introduced at gatherings as Kwabena's wife rather than by her own name and her own accomplishments. She had done it while the man she married called the work of her life little projects, and never once, not once, felt curious enough to look closer. She wiped her face. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She started the car. She drove home. She walked inside. She checked on Dubem, made sure he had eaten, made sure he had what he needed for the morning. She set the leather pouch on her nightstand. She turned out the light. She said nothing. Now let me take you into Dubem's world for a moment, because this story does not belong only to Nkechi and Kwabena. It belongs to their son too. And what that young man was carrying deserves to be spoken. Dubem was 19, and he knew everything. Not in the arrogant way that teenagers sometimes think they know everything. In the painful way, the way that children of difficult marriages always know more than the adults around them realize. He knew about Yolanda. He knew the first time his father brought her to a family gathering and introduced her with that particular lightness in his voice that was supposed to sound casual, but actually sounded rehearsed. He knew from the way Akosua positioned herself beside Yolanda at that barbecue, creating a wall of warmth around this new woman that was clearly designed to communicate something to everyone in attendance. He knew from the way his mother's name stopped being mentioned in family conversations, the way she went from being part of the fabric of every gathering to being a loose thread that no one acknowledged. He knew, and he carried that knowledge the way he carried everything, silently, heavily, with the particular stoicism of a young man who understood that if he broke down his mother would feel responsible, and he refused to add his pain to the weight she was already carrying. He watched his mother absorb blow after blow with a grace that both inspired him and broke his heart. He watched her show up to events where she was clearly unwelcome and conduct herself with a dignity that shamed everyone in the room, except the people it should have shamed most. He watched her come home from those events and walk straight to the study and close the door and not come out for hours. And he knew that behind that closed door, the stillness she showed the world was costing her something enormous. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to stand in front of her and shield her from every small cruelty his father's family was inflicting. But he was 19, and he was still learning the difference between the things he could change and the things he had to endure until he was strong enough to change them. His honors ceremony, the one coming up, it meant something to him that went beyond academics. It was proof that something good and strong and worthy could grow in difficult soil. Proof that the values his mother had planted in him, discipline, integrity, the willingness to work when no one is watching, had taken root and produced something real. He wanted her there. He wanted her in that auditorium more than he wanted anyone else on earth, and he wanted her to see that everything she had poured into him had not been wasted. The morning of the ceremony arrived the way important mornings do, slowly at first, heavy with significance, and then all at once, and Ketchy was awake before the sun. She had laid out her gown the night before, ivory, simple, architectural in its lines, the kind of garment that does not compete with the woman wearing it, but instead steps aside and lets her be seen. She checked it once. She checked it again, because her grandmother used to say the second look is where you catch what pride missed. She held the leather pouch in both hands without opening it. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she held it the way you hold something that has always held you up, the way you hold a hand that steadied you through every storm, even after the hand that held it was gone. She sat there for a long time, breathing, not praying exactly, just being present with the weight and the significance of this day. What she felt that morning, if she had to name it, was something she had never quite felt before. It was not sadness. She had moved past sadness a long time ago. It was not anger. Anger had served its purpose and been released. What she felt was something closer to patience arriving at its final moment, the way a breath feels right at the peak, right before you release it, full, complete, trembling with the energy of everything that is about to happen. She placed the pouch in her clutch. She got dressed. She looked at herself in the mirror one final time, and she left. Quabino was already gone. He had stayed at his own place, his word for it, the last 3 nights. She heard him come in late the night before and leave early, and she had long since stopped tracking his movements in any part of herself that they used to touch. He existed in her peripheral awareness now, like traffic noise or weather, present but no longer significant. She drove to the university alone. She liked arriving early. She liked the quiet of an auditorium before it fills, the clean rows of empty chairs, the stage set and waiting, the sense of something important about to begin. She found a seat in the 4th row, center section. She placed the gardenias on the seat beside her. She had bought them that morning. Dubem's favorite flower. She knew this because 5 years ago she had noticed him pausing by the gardenia bush in their backyard, leaning in and breathing deep with his eyes closed, and she had stored that detail the way she stored everything about her son, carefully, permanently, in a place where nothing could reach it. She had purchased 2 tickets, one for herself, one for Cabinia. She had saved the aisle seat so he could slide in easily if he came. She knew he probably would not sit beside her. She knew that if he came at all, he would come with his entourage, his performance, his carefully staged alternative family. She saved the seat anyway, not for him, for herself. Because integrity is not a performance you put on for people who deserve it. It is a structure you maintain because it is what holds you up. And Nkeki had never once in her life abandoned her own standards because someone else abandoned theirs. She sat straight. She folded her hands. She looked at the empty stage and allowed herself to feel the one thing that required no complication, no negotiation, no defense, a mother's pride. Dubem had earned this moment. Through discipline, through late nights, through choosing the hard path again and again, when the easy path was right there, through doing the work when no one was watching, which is the only kind of work that truly reveals a person's character. His father had not witnessed any of it, not the late nights, not the reread chapters, not the early mornings when Dubem dragged himself to his desk before dawn, because he had made a commitment, and he intended to honor it, Kadabina had not witnessed it because witnessing requires presence, and presence requires interest, and interest requires a kind of love he had stopped practicing a long time ago. But Nkechi had witnessed all of it, every single moment, and that was something no affair and no family betrayal and no small cruelty could touch. The auditorium filled around her. Other families arrived in waves of noise and color and the particular beautiful chaos of celebration. Mothers adjusting corsages, fathers filming everything on their phones, grandparents moving slowly through the aisles with the deliberate grace of people who understand that arriving matters more than arriving quickly. The sound of shared joy between people who had stayed by each other, who had shown up for each other, who had earned the right to sit in these chairs and feel proud. Nkechi watched it all, still present, absorbing every detail the way she absorbed everything completely, without display. And then the doors on the east side of the auditorium opened. Kwabena came through first, charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, because appearance was the one commitment he had never broken. He moved through the entrance with that particular walk of his, the one that said every room should be grateful for his arrival. Yolanda was beside him, scarlet dress, statement jewelry, heels that clicked against the auditorium floor with each step. She moved with the confident stride of a woman who had confused proximity with position, who believed that standing next to power made her powerful, who had mistaken being chosen by a married man for being chosen, without understanding that a man who will leave one woman will eventually leave another. Akosua walked a half-step behind them, scanning the room, reading the faces, making sure the scene was arranged to her satisfaction. She was the director of this particular production, and she had been staging it for months. They moved as a unit, practiced, coordinated. The choreography of a family portrait that had been deliberately recomposed to exclude one person. Keki watched them from the fourth row. Her face revealed nothing. Her hands remained folded in her lap. Her breathing did not change. Kadabina's eyes swept the auditorium and found her. They held each other's gaze for exactly 2 seconds, 2 seconds that contained 19 years of marriage, 2 seconds in which everything that had happened between them, the love and the loss and the betrayal and the silence, was compressed into a single wordless exchange. There was no regret in his eyes, just acknowledgement. The flat, detached acknowledgement of a man who knows exactly where he stands and feels no need to apologize for standing there. Nkechi held his gaze without flinching, without softening, without giving him a single thing he had not earned. He looked away first. He always looked away first. That told you everything you needed to know about which one of them was actually strong and which one was performing strength. Stay with me right here. Because what happens next between Dubem and his mother in this auditorium, that is the moment this entire story has been building toward. If you are feeling this story right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A woman you know who has been underestimated, a person who has been building in silence, someone who needs to be reminded that quiet is not the same as weak. Share it, and drop a comment below. Tell me, do you think Kwabena has any idea yet what he has lost? Do you think he has any idea who he was married to? Stay with me. Kwabena moved through the auditorium toward the section where Akosua had apparently already identified seats. He passed near the entrance where Dubem was standing with the other honors students, lined up in their academic regalia, waiting for the processional to begin. Kwabena leaned down toward his son. He said something, put a hand on Dubem's shoulder, the performative gesture of a father who shows up for the photo opportunity and calls it parenting. Nkechi watched her son's face from across the room. She was too far away to hear what was said, but she did not need to hear. She could read her son's face the way she could read everything, with precision, with love, with the accumulated knowledge of 19 years of paying attention. She watched the light in his face change, not go out entirely. Dubem was too strong for that, too much his mother's son. But shift, recalibrate. The way a young man's expression recalibrates when he is reminded, in a public space, surrounded by people, of a private wound he has been carrying alone for months. He saw Yolanda standing behind his father. He saw the scarlet dress. He saw his Aunt Akosua positioned beside her like a bodyguard of approval. He saw the three of them standing there like a portrait that had been painted over his mother's face, and his hands came together in front of him. Nkeki saw it instantly. The gesture, the one she had recognized since he was 7 years old. When Dubem was holding something back, when he was pressing down an emotion that was too big and too raw to release in the space he was standing in, he pressed his palms together in front of his chest. Not prayer containment, like he was trying to keep something from escaping. She saw it and she felt it in her own chest like a mirror. And then Dubem looked past his father, past Yolanda, past Akosua. His eyes moved across the auditorium, searching, scanning row after row with the focused desperation of a person looking for the one thing that will make everything else bearable. He found her, 4th row, center section, ivory gown gardenias on the seat beside her, hands folded. Face calm, with the kind of calm that is not absence but presence. The deepest, most complete kind of presence, the calm of a woman who has walked through fire and chosen, deliberately, consciously, with every ounce of strength she possesses, not to let it make her less than what she is. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that did not require words, that had never required words, that existed in a space beyond language, in the deep, wordless territory that only a mother and child can occupy. It was not a smile, it was not a nod, it was not any gesture that could be photographed or described in a sentence. It was recognition, the kind that happens at the cellular level, the kind that says, I see you, I know what you are carrying, I know what it has cost you, and I am still here. Dubem's hands separated, his shoulders straightened, something in his face, the tension, the hurt, the weight of watching his father stand with another woman at his son's ceremony, while his mother sat alone with flowers. Something shifted, settled, resolved into something that looked from across the room like peace. Not happiness exactly, something deeper. The recognition that the person who had always been there was still there. That steadiness was not absence. That quiet was not weakness. That the woman in the 4th row had built herself, and built him, and built an empire while the world treated her like she was invisible, and she had done all of it without ever, not once, losing herself in the process. He adjusted his cap. He turned toward the processional line. He was ready, and Keki in the 4th row opened her clutch. She touched the leather pouch once, gently, the way you touch something sacred, the way you touch the hand of someone who cannot be there anymore, but who is always, always there. She closed the clutch. She lifted her chin. The students processed in. The music played. The audience stood. And in the middle of that sea of proud families and clicking cameras and the particular joyful chaos of a graduation ceremony, Nkeki watched her son walk across the front of the auditorium with the other honors students, and she let herself feel every ounce of what that moment meant. The speeches came, the acknowledgements, the usual formalities that stretch and fill the space before the part everyone is waiting for, and then the dean stepped to the podium for a special announcement. There was, he said, a matter of particular significance to share with the audience this evening. A major gift had been made to the university's scholarship endowment, a transformative gift, the kind of contribution that would change the trajectory of the institution for decades to come. He paused. He adjusted his glasses. He looked out at the audience. The gift, he said, had come from the foundation of one of the most significant privately held firms in the country, a firm that had recently completed a landmark merger valued at over $32 billion. A firm founded and led by a woman who was sitting in the audience tonight. A woman who also happened to be the mother of one of their honors graduates. He said her name, Nkechi Okafor. The auditorium went quiet for one full second, the kind of quiet that happens when a large group of people simultaneously realizes that the ground beneath their assumptions has just shifted. Then the applause began, and it built, and it grew, and heads turned, and eyes searched the rows. And somewhere in the middle of it all, in the 4th row, center section, a woman in an ivory gown sat with her hands folded and her back straight, and her face composed with the same calm she had carried through every moment of her life, the same calm that had been mistaken for simplicity, or passivity for a lack of depth, for the quiet resignation of a woman with no ambition and no power and no fight. She was none of those things. She had never been any of those things. And the room was finally beginning to understand that Kwabina's face changed. It happened slowly, not all at once, layer by layer, like paint being stripped from a wall to reveal what was always underneath. The confidence drained first, then the composure, then the carefully maintained expression of a man who always knew exactly where he stood. What replaced it was something he had probably never felt before in his adult life. The sudden, devastating, irreversible comprehension that he had been wrong, not about one thing, about the woman he married, about the life she had built, about the scale of what she had accomplished, while he called it little projects and turned his attention to a woman who laughed at his jokes. He looked at Nkechi across the auditorium, and for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, he actually saw her. It was too late. Akosua's face shifted too. The careful composure she wore like armor cracked at the edges. You could see the recalculation happening in real time behind her eyes. Every Sunday dinner where she had positioned Yolanda in Nkechi's chair, every family photo where she had edited Nkechi out of the frame, every whispered conversation where she had treated her brother's wife like an afterthought, like a temporary inconvenience, like someone who could be replaced without consequence. All of it was being reprocessed through the lens of this new information, and the result was not flattering. Yolanda's face was the simplest to read. The scarlet dress suddenly looked too loud. The statement jewelry suddenly looked like a costume. She was a woman who had walked into a room believing she understood her position in the story, and she had just discovered that she was not even a character. She was a footnote. The applause faded. The ceremony continued. And then it was Dubem's turn. He walked to the podium to deliver the honors address. He was steady. He was clear. He spoke about discipline, about integrity, about the difference between talent and character, and why character wins every single time in the long run. Because talent is what you are given, and character is what you build, and no one can take from you what you built with your own hands. And then, near the end, he paused. He looked out at the audience. He looked at his mother. He said, "I want to thank one person, just one. The person who taught me that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding it up. The person who showed me that strength does not have to be loud to be real. The person who built something extraordinary while the world looked the other way, and who never once asked for recognition because she understood that the work itself was the point. Mom, everything I am sits in that chair with you." Nkechi's hands pressed together in her lap, not the containment gesture that Dubem used. Something else, something that looked like a woman holding herself together long enough to let this moment land before she let herself feel the full weight of it. She did not cry, not there, not yet. But something in her eyes, if you were close enough to see it, something glistened. After the ceremony, after the caps were thrown and the photographs were taken, and the families spilled out into the warm evening air, Kwabena approached Nkechi. For the first time in months he walked toward her without Yolanda beside him, without Akosua behind him, alone. He stood in front of her. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He said, "Nkechi, I did not know." She looked at him. She looked at him with those eyes that had seen everything, and absorbed everything, and survived everything. She looked at him with 19 years of patience and pain and power compressed into a single gaze. She said, "I know you did not know. That is exactly the problem." She did not say it with anger. She did not say it with cruelty. She said it with the plain, clean, devastating honesty of a woman who has said everything she needs to say and is not going to waste another word. She turned. She walked toward Dubem, who was standing a few feet away with the gardenias in his hands, the flowers she had brought for him. He had taken them from the seat when the ceremony ended, and he had not put them down since. They looked at each other, mother and son, two people who had survived the same storm and found each other on the same shore. She opened her arms. He stepped into them. She held him. She held him the way only a mother can hold a child, who is no longer a child, but will always, always be her child. She held him with everything, With the full weight of her love and her pride and her pain and her power, they stood there for a long time, the evening light falling warm around them, the sound of other families celebrating in the background, and then they walked to the car together, and they drove home. The divorce was filed the following week, quietly, cleanly, without performance. The same way Nkechi did everything, Kwabena contested nothing. What was there to contest? The woman he had underestimated for 19 years had built a life so complete, so structurally sound, so thoroughly prepared for this exact moment, that there was nothing left to argue about. The terms were fair. She made sure of that, because even now, even after everything, Nkechi did not operate from a place of revenge. She operated from integrity. Always Akosua called twice. Nkechi did not answer, not out of pettiness, out of completion. There was nothing left to say to a woman who had spent 20 years withholding warmth, and was now presumably calling to offer it. Some doors closed because they were never really open. Yolanda disappeared from the family narrative within 3 months, as quickly and completely as she had arrived. That is the nature of things built on convenience rather than commitment. They do not survive the first real test. And this was a real test. Dubem graduated with honors and began the next chapter of his life with the steady confidence of a young man who understood in his bones that he had been raised by someone extraordinary. And Nkechi continued to build. She expanded her firm. She mentored young women in business. She funded scholarships. She showed up in rooms where she was the only one who looked like her, and she conducted herself with the same quiet authority she had carried her entire life. She was not defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by what she built in spite of it. She still carried the leather pouch every day, in every meeting, on every flight, on every nightstand, in every hotel room in every city where her work took her. She carried it the way you carry a piece of someone who made you who you are, and on the first page, in fading handwriting, the words still read the same. A woman who knows her worth does not argue with those who cannot count. Now I want to talk directly to you for a moment, because this story is not just about Nkechi. This story is about anyone who has ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, anyone who has been made to feel small by people who mistook their silence for emptiness, anyone who has been building something extraordinary while the people closest to them dismissed it as unimportant. The lesson here is not about revenge. Nkechi did not seek revenge. She did not humiliate Kwabena. She did not destroy his family. She did not weaponize her success. The lesson is about something more powerful and more lasting than revenge. The lesson is about the difference between being done and being defeated, about what happens when you stop wasting energy trying to prove yourself to people who were never going to see you and start directing that energy toward the life you are actually building. The most dangerous person in any room is not the one making the most noise. It is the one who has been building in silence, who has been stacking brick on top of brick while everyone else was busy performing, who has been preparing for a moment that nobody else saw coming because nobody else was paying attention. Do not confuse someone's quietness with their limitations. Do not mistake gentleness for weakness. Do not assume that because someone does not fight back the way you expect them to, they do not have the power to fight. Sometimes the people who say the least are carrying the most. And sometimes the people you overlook are the ones who will outlast, outbuild, and outgrow you so completely that by the time you realize what happened, you are standing in the shadow of something you could have been part of if only you had been curious enough to look. If this story moved you, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. Not later, not tomorrow, right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who has been quiet, someone who has been underestimated, someone who is still building even though nobody around them seems to notice. Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite part of this story. Tell me what moment hit you the hardest, and if you are not subscribed to this channel yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story, because I promise you, the next one is going to hit just as hard. Until next time, stay building, stay patient, stay Stay true to yourself even when the people around you have stopped deserving your truth, and never ever let anyone reduce your empire to little projects.